Okay, welcome back. I am Jeremy Foote. I'm assistant professor in the Brian Lamb School of Communication at Purdue University. This is the second in a brief series of videos about online community founders and foundings. The first um, was about kind of the reasons I think that it's worth studying these foundings and founders, and what sort of the puzzles are and what we don't know about them. In this video, I'm going to talk about mostly about three papers that are around them and talk about what we do know about founders and foundings. So what do we know? The short answer is not very much. That there has been very little research about online community founders. If you look, for example, on Google Scholar, there are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of papers about entrepreneurs. There are papers about who becomes an entrepreneur. There are papers about what sorts of resources entrepreneurs are able to get and what differentiates successful and unsuccessful entrepreneurs. This is very well studied. People are very, very interested in understanding what makes a business successful, but there aren't very many people. I am one of the only people who is, with my great co-authors who have studied online community founders in any depth, with one exception that I'll talk a little bit about. But there's just hardly any research on online community founders. So I'm going to give in this video a quick overview of really almost the only three papers, two of which I am an author on, and one other which I'll actually save for last. So paper one. In this paper, we asked why people start new communities. This was published in 2017 in the Human Computer Interaction journal Chi with Darren Gergel and Aaron Shaw. This was when I was a PhD student at Northwestern. And this starts to get at part of the puzzle that we talked about in the first video. And that, as a reminder, that puzzle is simply that most online communities stay small, that they fail. This is wikis from Wikia, which is actually the context of this study. Excuse me. And this is the number of contributors per wiki. That, as you can see, the vast majority of people of wikis never gain more than 10 or 20 contributors at the most, while a few have tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of unique contributors. And so why do people keep starting communities if they're so likely to fail? Why I gave the example in the last video. If it was very likely that you would never learn how to swim, then you wouldn't take swimming lessons, right? Why would people persist in doing this thing that's very likely to not work? And there are some, kind of, if we think about the question, I think there are a few possible answers. And one is that maybe people just don't know how likely failure is, that they're just naive about it, that, they're playing the lottery, the community creation lottery. And yes, most fail, but if you don't. Second is that maybe people don't care how likely failure is. Maybe there are other reasons to do something, and that success doesn't matter as much. Another is that maybe the benefits are really high. Again, to go back to the lottery example, that maybe if you happen to be one of those people who creates a really large community, you get just such great, huge benefits that it's worth the risk of failure, even if that risk is really high. This is sort of a Pascal's wager version of community founding. And another possible answer is that maybe there is actually something about new and small communities that provides benefits that these large ones can't. That, in other words, that histogram I showed is missing something about what it means to create a new and small community. And so how might we be able to distinguish between these answers or find other answers for why people are willing to start new communities, like a resolution of this paradox, this question? or puzzle. And what we did is we asked them, we asked people. So we worked with Wikia.com, which is now fandom.com. It's a kind of the largest free online wiki platform. It hosts wikis on a number of topics, most of them increasingly, but also at the time of this study, about fandom. So kind of popular media objects. We worked with the folks at Wikia to send a survey right after someone had created a new wiki. So we asked them about their motivations. We asked them about their goals. What did they want for the wiki? What would be success to them? And we asked them about their past experience. And so what did people say? What were their goals? What did they want their wiki to accomplish? Their online community. High quality information was by far the top goal. If I remember right, it was about 50% of people, maybe more, said that a high quality information good. In other words, they were worried, they were interested in creating not so much a community as an artifact, that they wanted to produce a good information artifact. Second was a long lasting community, something that would, where people would continue to contribute and be a part of it. And a distant third was a high growth community that lots of people would participate and would join the community. And in fact, when we asked them, we said, how many people do you think are going to contribute in the first 30 days? This is a histogram of people's responses, which you'll notice is actually quite similar to the histogram of actual contributions to wikis. That most people believed that only a small number of people, so that only less than 10, or maybe 50. This mark is 100. Maybe 40 or 50 people would contribute, and that it just was very unlikely, which tells us that this is not. These are niche topics. People are intentionally building small communities, or at least expecting that their communities will be small, and that's okay. That they don't have naive expectations about what sort of size their community is going to grow to. And so I see as kind of the main takeaways of this paper. One is that probably the most important is that founders don't measure success by growth. That if you're just looking at the growth of a community or which communities are the biggest, then you're missing at least what founders care about. Second is that communities are part of a larger ecosystem, and this is maybe related. That many of the people that responded to the survey said that they were creating a wiki because one didn't exist about a topic on Wikia. That they sort of saw this as a larger project. That it's sort of like creating a new page, right? Or writing a new post on a subreddit. It's you don't see yourself as creating a brand new community, but it's sort of a sub community, a small fork of something larger. And so they're working sort of on this broader project of Wikia, and creating a new individual community was part of that. And so it's really important to understand sort of the platform ecosystem and what's going on there. And a third thing was that foundings were really spur of the moment decisions. We asked people, how long had you thought about founding this community? And for most of them, it was minutes or hours. It was sort of the scale rather than days. This wasn't like founding a new business where you need a business plan and you need to, figure out who you're going to recruit and get a team together. It is something that could just be done. It's not only is it easy technically, but it was kind of easy for people mentally and emotionally to do that. Okay, so that was the first paper, which was focused on kind of the why of why people would choose to become founders. The second paper is more looking at who starts new communities. What can we understand about the people who are founders, and in particular, how they differ from people who are not founders. And so this is a question that first paper couldn't answer because we were surveying founders. And so it's sort of like we needed a population to compare. This is a paper I worked on with Nashir Contractor, who's also at Northwestern again during my PhD. And so if we look, at entrepreneurs, if we think of founders as entrepreneurs, that can give us at least a starting point to think about what we might expect founders to look like. Again, there's lots of literature on entrepreneurs. If you watched my first video, there's lots of research about who they are and what makes them successful. And so if we think that it might be the same, then we can start there. Oh, just remember, it's not in my first video. It's in this video. Good. So you should have seen it. Okay. So entrepreneurs have more diverse experience than others. This is sort of a kind of a recap of a little bit of the research. In other words, they've for example, belonged to more different companies, worked for more different companies. They are more likely to have worked with other entrepreneurs. And those which are successful have more experience and have large and diverse social networks. They have what sociologists call social capital, the ability to learn from and possibly recruit people to help them in their new venture. So we thought, let's see if we can find evidence of these sorts of things in this founders, the same context, founders on Wikia. So we tried to compare those who did and didn't start a new wiki. What we did, hopefully you can see this, I'll describe it really quickly. We took a couple of this retrospective large-scale data analysis. We looked at all of the people who were active in March and April of 2009 and made measures of what they did, how many wikis they contributed, kind of who they worked with over this 2-month period. And then we looked at the new wikis started in May and June. So the next kind of looked at behavior in 2 months, and then the foundings over the following 2 months, and then finally looked at which wikis grew kind of about 6 months later, which ones had grown the most. So this is, we kind of, this was sort of a networks paper. One of the things we did is look at sort of where people were, both in individual networks, in the wiki they were most active in, and more broadly. And so, sorry, I'll give one more. So a network, in this case, a node represents a person, and so each of these is a person, and a link between them is that they have been either communicating with each other or have worked on the same page within the SpongeBob wiki. So so this group here in the middle sort of have all worked a lot, have all worked together on pages, whereas these folks on the periphery have only worked with this one individual. So what did we learn from this? Again, this sort of large-scale data analysis approach to understanding who becomes a founder. The first and kind of most obvious thing is that many founders are actually just learning this system. That 90% of wikis were started by people who had not been active in the previous period at all. They had no activity, and then they started a wiki in this 2 months that we looked at. And so they're not long-term users. They're new users. And in fact, only about 1% of people who were active ended up becoming a founder later. So this is kind of the first simple finding. The other, when we looked at compared founders these are people who were in the data, so non-newbie founders, compared those that became founders, kind of that 1%, those that were part of that 1% that became founders versus those that didn't. There were some actually pretty stark differences. So I'll explain this plot just a little bit. On the right, this is the number of edits that people had made, and whether they became a founder. In the orangish are people who did go on to become founders, and the greenish blue are people who didn't. And so the distribution of edits, the people who became founders were much more active overall than people who didn't. And they were across multiple wikis, the difference is even more stark, that they were much more likely to have edited lots of different wikis rather than just one, which is kind of by far the most common for the kind of normal users who didn't go on to start a new one. They also, the story over here, these are sort of, if something's over to the right, it's something that did predict becoming a founder. If it's to the left, it means that it made it less likely that they'd be a founder. Things that overlap with 0 are unlikely to make much of a difference. And so they're actually newer, as we kind of would have expected from our last finding. They had made more edits to more wikis. And overall, the rest of it, it's kind of a little bit, not quite as clear what to make of it. But we found that, for example, that they had created more pages and started wikis in the past. That's kind of obvious. But that they had kind of lower social capital along some dimensions and higher social capital among others. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag there. So that's the first finding. The second, we also looked at what about founders, the way they behaved in those 2 months, predicted whether their communities would grow in the future. And in this case, you can see, so these the red dot in the middle here represents the best estimate for how much each factor influences the community growth, but the line on either side is kind of how unsure we are about that. And the typical way to interpret these is that if this line overlaps with the 0, the dashed line, then it's something that we just aren't sure that it had any effect at all. It's maybe it's not super likely that it's important, at least, and maybe it didn't have any effect at all. And so there's some evidence. Again, all of these are on the right-hand side, sort of the experience measures, how many edits they'd made, how long it had been, how long they've been on Wikia, etc. But again, there's just the real story is there wasn't much evidence that sort of what you had done before, unlike with entrepreneurs, what you'd done before, who you knew, just does not have a strong impact on community growth. I think that's the main takeaway. So that's the kind of the second paper. Founding is a thing that newcomers do. That it seems, one good outcome of this is it seems like this should overall lead to diversity. If we assume that platforms become sort of more homogenous over time, then having newcomers be the ones who are starting the new communities, it seems likely that this sort of explores the topical space in a way that's more inclusive and more diverse. I think that's a good hopeful takeaway. A second, again, a little bit, there's some evidence to suggest that people may try to use new communities, that they sort of are a little bit on the periphery of the social world and may try to create a new community as a way to improve their social position. This is a little bit of a shaky conclusion, but there's at least a little bit of evidence for that. Okay. I want to talk next about the third paper. This is a paper by Bob Kraut and Andrew Fiore from 2014 about the role of founders in online groups. And the kind of question that they were asking is, what can founders do and what kind of founders create long-lived groups? And their approach is kind of similar to ours in the last one. It's definitely kind of a big data analysis, large-scale analysis of digital trace data, is what we call it. And this is from what I call the good old days of Facebook research, so pre-Cambridge Analytica, when Facebook sort of really had a fairly open approach, an open platform to letting people get data. That's changed very much since then. It's very difficult. It'd be impossible to do the kind of research that this is today. But they looked at about 470,000 Facebook groups. They were able to get characteristics and behavior of the founders before they started the group, and then look at what they did after the group started. And then they did what's called a survival analysis. They basically used statistics to try to predict the time at which the group would die, and they characterize that. They define that as when no new content was produced for 30 days. So what did they find? One is that founders who had more experience on Facebook, in general, and in Facebook groups in particular, they did better. That predicted that their groups would survive. That founders with more friends, their group survived. But interestingly, fewer friends who were in the group. That if everyone in the group was your friend, it was unlikely to survive that long. Which it may be that they're inadvertently measuring something like, popularity. If something spreads outside of your friend group, that's a good sign about, how popular or interesting the topic is. And in general, it's worth putting in a caveat here that neither my study nor this are causal or attempt to be causal in any way. That it's really just looking at relationships between these measures. And I think that's one thing that's missing from founder research that we need. So those are with that kind of caveat to the side, these are the things that at the attributes and resources that predict survival. So there are also some decisions or things that founders could do that they found also predicted that a community would survive. Doing things like adding pictures, adding an administrator, so if there are multiple administrators for the group, and then visiting and posting often. So active groups, and not just active, but active activity from the founder predicted survival. So that's the third paper, the Kraut and Fiore paper, and really that is here. I'll come back and talk to you for a second. There we go. That's really close to the limit of at least the papers that are recent, that are directly about online community founders trying to understand that sort of who they are and that initial decision to start a new community. And so obviously, like all of these studies are really fairly superficial. That like I said, none are trying to get at causal claims, and we're really just kind of scratching the surface of the sorts of questions that anyone would have about how these online foundings work. And in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I see as sort of the most interesting questions that are out there, and kind of where the frontier of the field is going forward.